If you believe, as I do, and then the founders did, that private property and liberty are inseparable, then let me suggest something that might be considered controversial, but at one time was an obvious truth. You ready? Individuals who pay a greater percentage of their earnings in taxes are less free in this country than those who pay a lesser percentage. That is, the progressive income tax creates different classes of citizens. We've been told that these different classes include the rich, the middle class, the poor, and offshoots of each. Well, what does that mean? These are nothing more than categories defined by the government for the purpose of punishing certain people and rewarding other people. And yet, these different classes aren't what they seem. Arbitrary classifications based on arbitrary income levels. What I'm saying is that if we agree that private property and liberty are inseparable, and they are, when you take a greater percentage of an individual's earnings, claiming that they, quote, can afford to pay more, unquote, you are taking more of that individual's liberty. In other words, that individual's intellectual and physical labor are being confiscated at a greater level or rate than another person's. Now, the typical response is, well, the wealthy can afford to pay more in taxes. Well, what's wealthy? Who decides that? So let's deal with that first. Is an individual who creates hundreds of thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in revenue all across this nation and is worth $45 billion himself, is that person wealthy? Yes, he's wealthy, but look at all the wealth he's created for millions and millions of others. Bill Gates. And by the way, Bill Gates would probably disagree with what I'm saying. What about a guy that's worth $10 million who's invented something that is crucial? Some kind of heart valve device. Is that too wealthy? And the list goes on and on and on. But I'm not talking about paying more in taxes per se. Okay? If the percentage of taxes is no different between and among citizens, then each citizen is as free as the next in this regard. I'm talking about the progressive income tax. Well, Mark, what about the poor? What if they don't earn anything or don't earn enough to actually pay taxes and feed or house themselves? Look, I understand that point. But nothing is actually being taken from them by the government, is it? They're still free to behave in ways that make them less poor or not poor at all. So from a liberty perspective, if they receive government benefits and pay nothing in taxes, they are recipients of the labor performed by somebody else. What of the person who inherits a great deal of money? What about him? Some member of his family, a parent or grandparent, obviously created property through their labor and secured it for their children and grandchildren. So to confiscate property from his children and grandchildren, even if he's dead, is to deny him the value of the labor that he had created during his lifetime. And many of us go to work every day or make investments to ensure that our children and our grandchildren will be provided for. We work today to provide for their future. Are you to deny us that? Because we choose not to purchase something material? So my proposition is that the progressive income tax isn't about generating more government revenue, as that can be achieved through a fairly modest flat tax. Even Adam Smith believed wealthier people should pay more for basic services, legitimate governmental purposes. But he would have rejected a progressive income tax as violative of individual liberty. It was Karl Marx who wrote that among the 10 elements of the Communist Manifesto was a progressive income tax. Now, this is not an academic matter. Stick with me. Once the idea becomes widely accepted that our government has a right, legal and moral, to create different arbitrary classes of citizens based on the amount of property they own or have acquired through their own labor or the labor of somebody else, like a family member, then you throw the gate wide open for the government to make all kinds of decisions about your liberty. Marx understood that, and so did Smith. The government can claim the authority to run virtually all aspects of your life. If you believe that the government has the right to create arbitrary classes of citizens based on arbitrary property levels, then you believe that the government has the right, with no constraint, to take the liberty of an individual who doesn't comply with the standards the government sets out. Because liberty and private property are inseparable, and yet, people just don't get it. So when the government steps in and decides that it's going to determine how much an executive should earn, whether or not that business has been subsidized, because most of them are these days, then the government is determining the liberty of those individuals, what liberty they will have and what they won't have. And the most nefarious of all, the destruction of the value of the currency. When you go to work, when you make investments, when you inherit money, you are inheriting, for all intents and purposes, the dollar. Many of them, perhaps, but the dollar. When the government intentionally seeks to devalue the dollar through irresponsible yet strategic fiscal spending that is intended to bankrupt the nation, or when the Fed prints money endlessly, which is intended to create trillions and trillions of pieces of paper, theoretically, then your government is intentionally trying to destroy the currency. The destruction of the currency is the destruction of your liberty. Your savings account, your pension plan, your paycheck, any of the material wealth that you have gathered over the years or hope to gather, the value of your home, the value of your automobile, it destroys a society. The only thing it doesn't destroy is the entity that's responsible for it, the government. The government becomes enormously powerful and dictatorial because no longer can the civil society exist. The underpinnings of the civil society, voluntary transactions, acceptance of a particular value for $1 as an example, savings, home ownership, all the rest of it. It is destroyed. It has no value anymore. And then we're all enslaved. We have no way to eat. We have no place to sleep. Nobody's manufacturing clothing. Nothing works anymore. We must all seek help from the government. Think about it.